subcommittee will come to order. Thank you for your return. The chair recognizes Sheila Jackson Lee, Chairwoman, Senior Member of the Committee and Chairwoman of the Transportation Security Subcommittee in the Homeland Security Committee.
Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for your leadership, and I thank this committee for its wisdom in proceeding forward on what I believe is an enormously important process. I disagree with my colleague and friend who is not here from California about the order of things, determining what happened before you can address the question of liability. This is a tort action. Whether it's an accident or not, there will be degrees of negligence, gross negligence, willful, and there's a question of the form of liability and whether or not punitive damages are too low, exist, and how are you to structure what may ultimately be the largest tort litigation in the history of this nation. One of the disappointments that I have, and certainly sad that we have come to this, is that we did not learn our lesson with the incident in Alaska, the Valdez, if you will, in structuring a scheme that would be responsive to the potential catastrophic event that this is. This will go down in the history books. And I recognize the value of those who are here. And allow me just to own up, because I do come from the energy capital of the world. And frankly, the presence of BP is in Houston. Presence of Transocean is in Houston. Presence of Halliburton was in Houston. Their headquarters now is in Dubai, leaving a gaping hole in our economy. And of course, their presence of Cameron International in Houston. So I speak now from a sense of balance and respect for the jobs that are created. But I also come from a region that is not far from the Gulf Coast, and I recognize the vitality and importance of the fishing and shrimping and oyster industry, and I've never found that industry to disturb the oil industry or the gas exploration industry. So why do we have a situation now where there is a constant referring that we're not ready to discuss liability when we have a whole entire industry shut down? First of all, I want to associate myself with the parish president of Plaquemines Parish, and I want the federal government to give them everything they need and let them be in charge to clean up what is an additional liability, and that is the horrific marsh or wetlands that are being literally destroyed as we speak. I have some quick questions for those who have already extended my personal sympathy and concern, and forgive me for just asking you quick questions so that I can focus on the question of liability. Mr. Jones, has any of these particular corporations come to offer you a settlement, sought you to sign papers, brought any issues to your attention regarding the tragic loss of your son?
Well, no, nothing of the kind. I should say that M.I. Swaco, Gordon's employer, has been very generous in their attention and their time. The day we knew Gordon was dead, the 5 top executives of M.I. Swaco, which has its office in Houston, came to the house, sat around the dining room table, and talked to us.
But no one has asked you to sign a settlement agreement.
I'm sorry?
No one has asked you to sign a settlement agreement. You have not signed a settlement agreement.
Oh, no.
Right.
No.
If you would forgive me so that I just wanted to try and precisely focus in on that. Mr. Brown, has anyone approached you to sign away your rights?
No, they haven't.
Mr. Stone, I understand you were met in a store, a restaurant, and someone asked you to sign away or to say that you were not injured. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. It was for the personal items lost on the rig. They reimbursed us for that, but there was also a waiver that said that I was not injured and I wasn't.
Did they have where were you located? Where was this meeting at?
Oh, it was at a Denny's in Cape.
And did they bring a physician? Did you have a physician there?
No, ma'am.
Assessing you? Did you have a psychiatrist or a psychologist assessing you?
No, ma'am.
Did you have your own physician there assessing you while they were speaking to you?
No, ma'am.
Did you have your own psychiatrist there?
No, ma'am.
Well, did you have a lawyer there?
No, ma'am.
Did it strike you as strange to be assessed as having not been injured by, I don't know whether it was a claims adjuster in a Denny's restaurant?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me how soon that was, sir, after the occurrence?
I think maybe a week.
Less than 2 weeks, you were asked to sign a settlement. And what company was that?
I'm sorry?
What company was that?
I believe it's Schumann Consultants.
All right.
I think it's Transocean's insurance.
Let me then, thank you very much. Let me quickly try to ask these questions. First of all, in the Wall Street Journal today, they have mentioned 3 items that suggest that BP might have short-circuited, shortcut procedures that might have created the explosion, the rising gas. We're not here to determine that. That ultimately may be in a court of law. But quickly, Len, I go down to the companies that are involved: Transocean, BP, Halliburton, and the Attorney General. Quickly to the Attorney General, if I can pursue this question quickly. What is the fix that you need? And if you can be very quick on that, and let me let you be last, the fix that you need for this committee to do on liability. To Mr. Willis, let me ask you directly, will you pay everything that is determined to be your fault to the maximum, including the environmental impact? Is BP prepared to pay it all?
Representative Jackson Lee, BP is prepared to pay for all of the damage associated with the impact of this spill.
So that means health and safety, the oyster farmers and all, to the maximum amount necessary to make them whole?
We are going to do the right thing, and we're going
Without litigation?
we're going to pay the damages caused by the spill.
And who will determine the damages? A court of law?
The damages are all being, I'll give you an example. We've opened the claims process, and to date we've seen over 25,000 people in our claims office. We've paid over 13,000 claims, and we're doing that every single day.
So what you're saying to me is that you will, I guess the concern I have, and I'll have to pursue this later because I'll move on, is that you will pay the maximum. But the question is, are you dumbing down the claims? I can't get that answer. Let me ask the Transocean representative, please, as to why you would have a representative in a Denny's restaurant asking one of the victims to sign off on whether they were injured or not. And is this the mode of operations that you're doing to people who are now victimized, frightened, and without sufficient legal representation? Can I ask you to cease and desist this kind of method of approaching victims and asking them to sign away their rights?
Yes, Congresswoman, that has not been our course of conduct. The circumstances of this particular meeting were on April 30, 10 days after the accident. A guy by the name of Mr. Stephen McClellan, who is not a lawyer, met with Mr. Stone to give him the $5,000 check that was paid to all persons on board, not in settlement of anything, but just for personal belongings on board. That was kind of the standard amount paid out to employees.
But he understands that you were trying to get him to sign away his rights.
No release was signed. I have no release on file.
I know, but he refused it. How many signed it out of fear, apprehension, and lack of knowledge? I'm asking you, will you cease and desist putting forward these kinds of papers in front of anybody from now on?
It's an easy answer to say yes, because we have not done so. No one has been asked to sign a release of Transocean following the incident.
Halliburton,
they were asked some basic factual questions to help our investigation. That's already been concluded. Some employees participated, some employees did not. No employee has been asked to or has signed a release of liability in connection with the incident.
Halliburton, thank you so very much. Halliburton, you were responsible for the cementing, which has been characterized as erroneous. Are there any existing liability that you now owe that you are not willing to pay, or are you willing to pay the maximum that may be required because of further determinations?
Well, we certainly are willing to honor any obligations that we have.
Mr. Hood, Attorney General Hood, I quickly need to finish with you and ask, what is the fix, and do we need to lift the $75 million liability, and do we need to have legislation to allow you to be in your state courts, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, and Alabama, and others that may be impacted?
Yes, ma'am. My recommendation is and I have that attached to my comments, some actual drafts of legislation, prevent removal of state causes of action when the state is the plaintiff. There's no respect in the federal judiciary for the 11th Amendment anymore. So we need to try to fix that. The Class Action Fairness Act, there were 47 attorneys general signed letters to Congress asking that we be accepted from the Class Action Fairness Act. It was not done because many said that, oh, well, you know, the states won't be subject to it. Well, the Fifth Circuit has said that they are. We need to amend that, expressly accept the states. Open 90, the states need to be expressly accepted, although it's clear that the statute contemplates state concurrent jurisdiction. The federal judges have said, oh, well, that raises a federal question, therefore you can be removed to federal court. And the other would deal with the limitation of liability. We need to be accepted from that. Transocean just filed a limitation of liability before a federal district judge in Houston, Texas, where they're trying to bring all the states. The federal government just got out yesterday, but we want out of it as well, and we believe that it should be amended. It's just an antiquated 1851 statute where they're trying to drag us into federal court. And the lastly, Rule F that applies to admiralty matters, we suggest that it be amended. So we just want to have our causes of action heard in state court. But
overall,
as it is
do you think the $75 million should be lifted? Speak for yourself, but there are other victims here, individuals. Do you think that $75 million that was placed in law is too low at this point?
I think it was. I think the industry had a tremendous impact in the drafting of that legislation in 1990. And I think it's too low. Certainly, I'm proud to see that BP committed in writing to 5 of us attorneys general that they would not raise that cap. But we won't be able to. We probably won't even plead any actions under OPA because we're afraid some federal judge is going to drag us out to Houston, Texas. And so we're probably going to just refrain and file state causes of actions. And so that OPA cap is somewhat. Hopefully won't be applicable to the states.
Let me just thank the chairman, and if I might just point to Mr. Encalade, who I know will be questioned, but are you without income now at all, sir? Is your 300 family members or connected members of your community totally impacted right now, and you see this as a long-range impact?
Yes, Congresswoman. There are 90% of the fishermen in our community are completely out of income. And though there are some questions about some oyster beds being open, available for harvest, but the conditions are horrible, you know, and these fishermen also take it upon themselves to have a responsibility to the public, and they're not going to go into waters that they may feel could cause harm. So, yes, 90% of them are out of work in our community.
Mr. Willis, can you help him? Can you help him right here today? Can you get to Willis, get to his location and deal with this harm?
As a matter of fact, Representative Jackson Lee, I actually met Mr. Encalade in Louisiana about 7 days ago at a town hall in Port Sulphur. I was on the phone last night with some folks who are working on the ground for BP in Pointe-la-Hache, the community that he's describing. We have a claims office that we opened in Pointe-la-Hache. We have a community outreach center that we've opened in Pointe-la-Hache. We're seeing people there. We're bringing checks to them in Pointe-la-Hache. If they can't come across the water to our office in Venice, we are working with that community. As a matter of fact, I've personally written a check on behalf of BP for the food pantry in Pointe-la-Hache, given the fact that so many people in that community rely on that water in Louisiana to make their living. In that area, in Plaquemines Parish, we've paid over 1,000 claims. The claims office, as a matter of fact, Representative Lee, in Venice, which is not too far from Pointe-la-Hache, I was physically there and opened it myself.
Well, I'm going to yield back. I just want to make sure that you're not making these farmers, these fishermen, sign any of their rights away to get a minimum baseline check to help them get bread, water, and fruit.
Absolutely not.
All right. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Senior Member Trent Franks, Ranking Member of Commercial Law Committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to begin by offering my sincerest and warmest condolences to the people who have lost loved ones in this tragic accident. As it happens, unlike most of the members of the committee, I have been intrinsically involved in this industry, having started out when I was a very, very young man working on a drilling rig. I'm familiar with the Transocean drilling company. I'm familiar with Halliburton. They've actually cemented wells that I have been on and owned, and I've owned Cameron blowout preventers. So this is something that I'm very familiar with, and so I guess in some ways that's a little bit of a disadvantage to me, Mr. Chairman, because I understand the very difficult nature of going out into the middle of the ocean, a mile off the ocean floor, and drilling a total from top to bottom of 18,000 feet, and recognizing some of the horrific pressures, bottom hole pressures there that are dealt with. And I know that it is a very difficult environment. And I You know, we always used to hold up roughnecks as some of the toughest guys in the world because they had the courage to go out there and make that happen. And so there's a sort of a brotherhood there that I feel towards some of the people that have done this kind of work. And again, I understand just the intrinsic risk involved. It's not easy. Part of it, I'll say that perhaps it'll sound political, but I don't mean for it to. Part of it is that a lot of the major companies, they would like to be drilling onshore because it's about 1/10 as expensive if they could find the reserves and if they could find the opportunity to do that. But a lot of times they can't, so they're forced offshore, and it is an extremely difficult environment. So when I ask these questions here, I don't know how long I'm going to be offered here, but I'm not trying to assign anything, because I think one of the things that's been mentioned earlier today is we don't really know all of what happened. There are a few people who do, but we don't really know what has happened. But I do know that the primary protections against horrific bottom hole pressures, in this case, if it's 18,000, the hydrostatic gradient alone would probably be over 8,000 pounds per square inch, which is a volcano that very few people understand when it's completely unleashed. I mean, the destruction of the drilling rig probably is some sort of an example to people. But having said that, there are two main protections that one has against the pressures like this, and that is the weight of the column of drilling mud, the drilling fluid, and of course the blowout preventer if that fails. And I'm told that there was a small boat that they said it felt like it was raining and it looked like black rain. I'm absolutely convinced that was drilling mud that was blowing out of the hole at the time. And of course, a roughneck knows that when drilling mud blows out of the hole that it's time to leave the premises. And I know that 11 people didn't get off in time. And again, I offer my most profound apologies and or condolences because I lost a very, very dear friend on a drilling rig at one time. And there were, in one case in my earlier life, there were 5 men that I knew, not working for me at the time, but 5 men that I knew that were killed within a space of a month in the Texas oil fields drilling to the Ellenberger, shallow 4,000 foot or less. So I know that this is a very hazardous environment. With that said, rather than me trying to talk about liabilities here, I'd like to try to figure out a little bit about the echelons of the engineering process that took place. I'm assuming that somehow the drilling column was diminished in density, whether it was mixing with seawater or something along those lines when they were staging the cement job. I'm guessing that happened, and I'm not suggesting that, just guessing it. But I guess I would ask, I know that Halliburton's worked for me at times, and they've always done a fantastic and very professional job. But I know that sometimes there's sort of a team of engineers. It's sort of a joint effort between the Halliburton engineers or the cementing engineers and the engineers that work for BP or the ones that work for the operator, or in some cases the contractor has an engineer too. But can anyone on the panel, it asks for a lot of courage, I suppose, but can anyone on the panel give me some idea of what the engineering protocol was there? Who was in charge of the cementing process at the time? Again, I'm talking about who was the ultimate last word in the process. And I probably should ask the Halliburton representative first.
Yes, sir. I can't really go into all of the technical details of it, but I can say that we did the cement placement on this well. We have an engineer that specializes in cementing that is actually in the BP offices in Houston. What we'll do is they will come to us and they'll ask us, they'll give us information on the well, on the temperatures, on the type of pressures and that sort of thing.
Were they able to give you a bottom hole pressure?
We get a lot of different information from them in the beginning. I mean, it's that way on all wells, because I mean, we don't go down and, we don't have any way to get that ourselves. So we get that information. We design what we feel like is a good cementing program for that. We make proposals to them. It goes back and forth. There are a lot of other elements of a cementing process that's really controlled by the well owner on the rig.
Sure.
That we don't have any control over, but we can run computer simulations and tell them if you do this, then it looks like you're going to have a certain result on the cement at the bottom, and you go back and forth with that until such time that the owner decides what they're going to do, and then at that point they go ahead and conduct the operation.
But BP's engineers, I've never worked with BP, but their engineers are the ones that essentially had the last word, and the Halliburton engineers probably gave them their volumetric calculations, their projections, and it was
Well,
EPA.
certainly we do that. I mean, we even give them computer simulations.
Right.
You know, if you run it this particular way, this is likely
Yeah.
to be the result, and it gives them charts that
Sure.
shows them how that looks.
Well, that makes sense. Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me, again, the two aspects of this is the weight of the column of mud, which did blow out. There was some miscalculation there. It could have been a methane bubble, whatever. Something happened that the hydrostatic pressure of the drilling column became less than the bottom hole pressure, and that's what caused the blowout. So if you'll indulge me to ask the Cameron representative, I've owned Cameron blowout preventers, and I'm guessing that this probably had a butyl ram, a blind ram, and probably a pipe ram and a shear ram. And there's been some discussion that the shear ram hit a joint, which is a much heavier element of the pipe, and didn't shear it. And I'm wondering, is that first of all, I guess I would ask are my conclusions, or were these 3 or 4 rams present in the Cameron stacked blowout preventer?
Congressman, yes, there were 4 rams. One was a test ram. There were a couple pipe rams. There was a shear ram, and I think there was an annular also. That we don't really know what happened, and why this didn't work. One theory is it could have hit a pipe joint, but we don't know that for a fact, and we won't until we can retrieve it.
Well, no, and I understand that. I mean, I fully embrace that, because I think it would be speculation on anyone's part at this point, especially since you probably lost communication with the BOP at the time, and when the rig when it blew out. Am I correct in assuming that you probably had some sort of a hydraulic actuator and an electronic actuator, and perhaps even a dead man switch on the BOP, and that you probably lost contact with all of those, or at least the floor of the rig lost contact with all of those when it went in the ocean?
Well, again, we don't know. We assume that the EDS lost contact electrically or communications. We're not sure whether it lost it hydraulically or not. Mm-hmm. And for the dead man to fire, it requires all 3 to be lost.
Right.
So the EDS could not work if the power is gone or the communication capabilities are gone. But if the hydraulics stay in place, then it doesn't get the message to fire, but neither does the dead man work, because all 3 weren't cut.
Right, I got you. Well, one last thought, Mr. Chairman. A lot of the blowout preventers I've used have like a nitrogen accumulator to actually actuate the closing of the preventer, or hydraulics. In this case, what was the actual energy source to close the blowout preventer? Was that some sort of accumulator on the ocean floor?
This is way beyond my area of competence, but I understand that there were multiple accumulators on this BOP.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll stop there. Again, my condolences first and foremost to those who lost their lives and to those who have been left behind. It is a very, very difficult challenge, meeting the energy needs of this country, and I know that there will be, in my judgment, personal and human error discovered here, or at least miscalculation, and those things will have to bear out as they will. But I guess I would remind all of us that we only produce about 40% of our own oil in this country, and the 60% that we buy, some of that finds its way into terrorist coffers, and so there are big implications here to losing our ability to produce our own energy, and certainly countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia will probably be less inclined to curtail their drilling operations because of a tragic accident, and I hope we can do whatever is necessary to make sure this never happens again, but we should not lose sight of the fact that this is a very challenging environment, like so many other things in this enterprise of humanity. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me.
Senior Member Maxine Waters, Chair of the Housing Committee and Financial Services.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. First, let me say to Mr. Jones, I am just so sorry about the loss of your son. I thank you for being here today. And to Mr. Brown, I'm pleased that you survived, but I'm so sorry about what you have had to go through and what you're still going through with. And Mr. Stone and all of the families, I'm just terribly pained about the loss of all of the personnel and the harm that has been caused in what I think will be the greatest ecological and geological disaster in the history of this country. I'd wanted to spend some time with you, Mr. Encalade, to talk about the history of the black oyster farmers fishermen down there, but I want to pass over that for a moment because BP is here today, represented by Mr. Willis, saying all the right things about what all they're prepared to do and all the responsibility that they're going to accept. But I can't trust that. I can't trust that because of the history of BP that we have learned about since this disaster has taken place. Over the past 2 decades, BP subsidiaries have been convicted 3 times of environmental crimes in Alaska and Texas, including 2 felonies. It remains on probation for 2 of them. It has also received the biggest fine for willful work safety violations in the U.S. history and is the subject of a wide range of safety investigations, including one in Washington State that resulted in a relative minor $69,000 fine for 13 serious safety violations at its Cherry Point refinery near Ferndale, Washington. As a matter of fact, a review of BP's history shows a pattern of ethically questionable and illegal behavior that goes back for decades. BP's best-known disaster took place in 2005 when an explosion at its refinery in Texas City near Galveston killed 15 workers, injured 180 people, and forced thousands of nearby residents to remain sheltered in their homes. An investigation of the explosion by the U.S. Chemical Society and Hazard Investigation Board blamed BP for the explosion and offered a scathing assessment of the company. It found organizational and safety deficiencies at all levels of the BP Corporation and said management failures could be traced from Texas to London. It goes on and on and on. The company eventually pleaded guilty to a felony violation of the Clean Air Act and was fined $50 million and sentenced to 3 years probation. The Occupational Health and Safety Administration assessed BP the largest fine in OSHA history, $87 million, after inspectors found 270 safety violations that had been previously cited but not fixed, and 439 new violations. BP is appealing that fine, but BP's legal and ethical problems go back much further. So we don't trust you. We don't trust what you say. We're watching what you do. And I want to tell you that some of us are dedicated to the proposition that we're going to see that the people and communities that have been harmed get compensated and get compensated generously, and that we're prepared to do whatever we have to do to make sure that that happens. And I want to tell you further, as this disaster has occurred, when you first set up your claims offices, and you're here to talk about claims, Mr. Willis, and you're talking about what you didn't have a claims office that was in the minority community and in this village that Mr. Encalade comes from here today. They had to fight for that. And we also know that there was some attempt to have people sign settlements rather than claims. So we don't trust you. And I want you to know that in addition to the lack of trust that we have people that we have had to organize who have organized themselves to come here today to be of assistance to Mr. Encalade in this testimony. Minister Edwards, you know, he has to get all involved in this. Mr. Encalade's son-in-law had to stop what he's doing, get all involved in this. Young attorneys out of New Orleans that we've been working with because we had the same kind of situations where the small people were not being taken care of after Katrina, that have been working with this situation, and they do it as volunteers. You aren't paying for any of that. As a matter of fact, did you ask Mr. Encalade how he got here today? Halliburton? BP, any of you rich corporate guys, do you know who paid their way here today, how they got here? And the people that accompanied them, would you ask them after this committee and would you offer to be of assistance to them so that these people, especially Mr. Encalade, who has lost 90% of his income or all of it, would you assist him in reimbursing him for the money that he's had to pay out of his pocket and all of those that accompanied him? We have to tell you that we want to see better efforts and better work. If you want us to believe you when you come here, why do we have to keep struggling and fighting? Is it true, Mr. Encalade, that you all had to go and fight because you had to travel 300 miles to get to the claims office?
Yes, Congressman Waters, yes, that is true. We had no claims, we had anything, and it's something that I think BP still doesn't understand. You know, food stamps and welfare is fine for elderly people that are home that cannot support themselves, that's living off of $500 a month. These fishermen work hard. They have boats that values in excess of $100-some thousand. They have oyster beds. They're worked, bedded, and everything. I don't feel I should have to go up to a food stamp office to get food stamp to support my family for something that was out of my control. I had no doing with for someone else to put me out of business. And I say, you know, we live in a country that I love dearly. I'm a veteran. And I know anywhere if we did harm to any country or any citizen in another country, we would have to pay. The United States government would take care of that family just as we have done in the past. And what I'm saying is, no, I'm sorry, we are a proud people. Food stamps and welfare belongs with people that cannot feed or work and take care of themselves. We are proud people.
Mr. Willis, I just reviewed your claims process.
Yes, ma'am.
And I understand that people are calling in, they ask for certain information, and they don't send the claims adjuster out. They ask the people to come in then to the claims office, and you're basically giving $5,000 or $2,500. But what about, is that some kind of temporary holding compensation until there is an assessment done of the total damage that has been done to the individuals? How does that work?
I'm happy to answer your question, Representative Waters. And I wanted to start by just saying that in Louisiana alone, of the claims we've paid, over 60% of the monies that have been paid out to date, over 60% of the $37 million has been paid in Louisiana. We've paid a total
Just tell me how the claims process works.
How the claim process works. We have three ways that the claims process can be accessed. It can either be accessed through our 1-800 number, which is 1-800-440-0858. That number is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People can go online and file a claim at www.bp.com/claims, or they can walk into one of our claims offices. As I mentioned in my testimony, we have a total of 24 claims offices open to date, 9 of those in Louisiana. We have one in Venice. We had one in Pointe.
I know where they are. How do they work?
The way they work is you go into an office, and if you're a boat captain or a fisherman, you bring in a tax return. If you don't have a tax return, you can bring in payroll check stub for a month. You can bring in deposit slips. You can bring in boat tickets or shrimp tickets or fish tickets, anything that shows how much money you make for a month. What we've tried to do is not put a cumbersome process in place. When I got involved in this, and
please, when you bring in all your documentation and it's agreed upon, how much money can you receive?
You will be fully compensated for your losses. But what we've done, Representative Waters, in order to expedite the process, this was a process that was initially going to take 45 days to get a check into someone's hand. We can do it in 48 hours now. And what we've done is bias the process towards getting money to people quickly. $5,000 for boat captains, $25 for deckhands. We'll pay them.
So you have this amount that you give. It's a temporary and expedited process, and then the rest will come along.
Absolutely.
And what length of time?
It's going to come along as we continue to evaluate the process.
You're not going out to do the adjustments. How do you figure out whether or not these claims are authentic?
We will be going out to do the adjustments, but what I was...
You're going to do that before you give the rest of the money from,
It's an ongoing process. What I was most concerned about, what BP has been most concerned about, is getting money into the hands of the people who are hurting and been hurt by this oil spill sooner rather than later.
Yeah, but see, here's one of the problems. You can call your number, and they will ask you for your Social Security number. They will ask you for a few other things. They will give you a claims number. Then they will ask you to come into the office. You'll get the $5,000 or $20,000. But if you've got problems, your 1-800 number, 1-800-573-8249, is not a 24-hour number. And this is where we run into problems. You run into problems because people are trying to follow up to find out when the rest of their money is going to come, what other documentation they have to have, what do they have to do. But this is where you're going to have problems. Why isn't that a 24-hour number also?
It is, the number for the claims line,
1-800-573-8249, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., not a 24-hour number.
No, I'm
That's the
speaking of-
follow-up number.
that number is not a 24-hour number.
Why don't you make it a 24-hour
We
number?
will definitely do that.
Well, let me just
I
say
can make
this,
that
Mr.
happen.
Chairman, as I wrap up. We've worked with the Road Home program from your beloved state,
Yes.
Louisiana. There are still people who have not been compensated. The system bogs down, and it literally ignores small people who don't have money to go get lawyers to fight the bureaucracy. And that's what we want to avoid. Some of us are far away from Louisiana, but we care so much about these issues. We're coming. We're going to follow up on it. Just as I walk through your claims process, I'm going to knock on the doors of the claims adjusters. I'm going to come. I'm going to follow up to make sure that these people are compensated. These small fishermen, these black fishermen, these Asa fishermen who have been doing this for years, in third and fourth generations, they got to be treated fairly, and we want to make sure of that. Transocean, I'm suspicious of you too. You have dodged paying your U.S. corporate taxes by locating in headquarters in Switzerland. You know you can't be trusted. And aside from that, I want the Honorable Jim Hood to tell me about what have you filed. Are you trying to limit liability in the way that they have filed, Mr. Hood?
Transocean filed in Houston, Texas, an action to try to pull in as many people as they possibly could. BP filed a consolidation action before another federal judge in Houston, Texas, to try to consolidate as many as possible. We states, and that includes Florida, some of the Republican colleagues will recall Bill McCollum was a member of this honorable body as an attorney general in Florida running for governor there. And I assure you that every one of my colleagues want to have our cases heard in our state courts and not be pulled off by some of their actions before some judge in Houston, Texas. So we've asked that there be some amendments to some legislation to prevent that. Those are procedural amendments. They're not some ex post facto problem. We believe that it would relieve the states from having to fight for 20 years, as did people that were victims of the Exxon Valdez spill.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the extra time that you have given me, but this gentleman has a legitimate concern in that amendment that he's asking for, and as chairman, I will take your leadership on that, but we got to watch Transocean, okay? Thank you.
Judge Ted Poe of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know y'all have had a long day. Have some questions and concerns, of course. I represent Southeast Texas. We border southwestern Louisiana across the Sabine River, or as y'all say in Louisiana, the Sabine River. And I probably represent more refineries than any member of Congress there in Jefferson County, 22% of the nation's refineries. We love the oil and gas industry, and we want them to stay in business because it supplies thousands of jobs for Southeast Texas. And most of those folks work in refineries, they work offshore. I think those are the toughest jobs in America. That's my opinion. Right now, 180,000 people are affected by job loss because of this disaster. And Mr. Hood, being an old trial judge in Houston, state judge, not a federal judge, I agree with you on the 11th Amendment. Just your legal opinion. Do you think the current law allows you to file suit and have lawsuits in your state, and the Fifth Circuit misinterpreted it, or you think they got it right and we need to fix it? Just quick answer.
The answer is that we have a cause of action we can file in state court. OPA contemplates state court actions. The federal district court in Louisiana is the one that misinterpreted that. Fifth Circuit misinterpreted CAFA. And all the senators agreed that were on the floor. We have the minutes of it saying states won't be subject to CAFA. It was bipartisan. 47 attorneys general signed a letter, and I have a copy of it here, where we asked that we be expressly accepted from CAFA. And the Fifth Circuit put that in their opinion, but they ignored it.
Right.
So you have federal courts sapping up authorities that belong to the sovereign states, and we want to protect
But
that.
still your opinion, you can sue in state court.
Yes, sir.
Okay. My concern, I think there's really four issues here. First of all, we're going to need to deal with the loss of life. and the injuries. We hadn't heard a lot about that through the national media. Then we have to deal with the loss of businesses that are directly affected. We have to deal with the damage caused to the environment, and we have to find out what happened. And we have to find out what happened probably first. We don't know, really. My question, and Mr. Foley may be the expert on this, who's in charge? You know, we've heard that BP's in charge, the federal government's in charge, nobody's in charge. Mr. Willis, who's supposed to be in charge of this situation?
Representative Poe?
That's me.
Okay.
Guilty as charged.
All I can tell you is that I know who's in charge of the claims process for BP and who's in charge of making sure folks are compensated for their losses, and that's
you.
me.
Is BP in charge of this whole cleanup operation?
I know that I'm in charge of the Coast Guard.
No, you don't know.
I don't know.
Mr. Foley, who's supposed to be in charge of this?
Response, the federal incident commander is in charge, and he's usually from a government agency.
Like the Coast
Guard. He has 51% of the vote, but it's a collaborative effort between stakeholders and the responsible party and a number of different people involved in the spill response.
So who's in charge? Is the federal government in charge?
The incident commander. Incident commander has the decision maker.
And that's a federal employee?
Yes.
And right now it's the Coast Guard?
And they're overseeing the responsible party's efforts to respond to the spill.
So when the blowout happens, it seems to me we just kind of waited to see how much damage was done. I say we, the system. Kind of waited to see what damage was done, and then everybody started saying or pointing fingers at other people. When it happens like this, blowout, oil spill, who is supposed to respond first? Mr. Foley, can you answer that? We've got 12 people here. Can anybody answer that question?
There's a scheme in place for oil spill response. The responsible party is supposed to report it to the National Pollution Fund Center, and the National Pollution Fund Center sends out a notice to claimants to set up a claims process. Okay. In terms of
cleanup, I'm talking about cleanup right now.
For cleanup, it's usually the Coast Guard sets up different response centers in the areas that are going to be affected, and they bring a lot of the responsible parties responsible to bring the resources. There is a response plan where they have to activate their oil spill response contractors and act. In this case, it's a spill of national significance, so it's going to be the biggest response that they've trained for these oil spills.
So the Coast Guard is in charge of the cleanup.
The government agencies have oversight responsibility for the responsible party who has to bring all the resources to bear on responding.
I'm not arguing with Mr. Foley. Is the Coast Guard in charge or not? Do you know? Under the law,
no.
You're the expert in this law.
I have not been involved with the spill response in any way, and I'm not familiar with any of the details.
Can any of you answer that question? This happens. I assume that the different corporations are trying to clean up, but who is in charge of making sure cleanup occurs, even to this day? Can any of you answer that question? At least FEMA's not in charge. But who is in charge? Nobody knows?
Judge, the Coast Guard has the responsibility, but the problem is they're having to rely on information that's provided to them by BP. So it's a kind of a joint authority, but the inline, top-line authority is supposed to be the Coast Guard.
Well, what concerns me is, this has been 5 weeks, and because, this is my opinion, the response to the cleanup seemed to delay, and I don't know if it's the Coast Guard or who, but that just increases damages, because the cleanup, if it's not contained, of course, it eventually gets to Louisiana or Mississippi or to Texas. And the longer we wait on cleanup, and we've heard these comments from different people that are affected, that no one's really trying to clean up the mess or is in charge, it increases damages, and somebody's going to have to pay for that. Mr. Hood, you want to give me some insight on that?
Yes, sir. I flew over Chandelier Island, which is about a 60-mile island running north and south. It's about, the northern tip is about 30 to 40 miles from Mississippi, our coast. On Thursday, 2 weeks after it occurred, Secretary Janet Napolitano came down And there were booms already around. So we've had the booms around our barrier islands. I think the Coast Guard did a pretty good job in responding, getting the booms out there, but they don't work. I mean, it was a sea of red around Chandelier Island,
Okay.
and it's some great fishing around that area. So I think they got it out there, but they just don't have the capability of dealing with it. Booms just don't really work, especially in rough water.
All right. I understand in Louisiana there were people in the fishermen that were willing to help on the cleanup, and that got bogged down in red tape. Mr. Encalade, can you help me out with that? Is that true, or is that just something we heard? Can't hear you.
Congressman Paul, yes, it is true. I mean, and I have to be honest with you. We stood, our old people, we stood on these canal banks and watched them deploy these booms in this rough water with a southeast wind coming in on the shores of Louisiana and Mississippi. And, sir, I have to be honest with you. We told them they were wasting their time, but nobody listened. And, I mean, it's those kind of things this is why I'm here. Because just as Congresswoman Waters said, we can't afford to keep making mistakes, and we are paying a price for them. And, you know, and just like she stated, you know, road home and all of this, we're still being affected. We haven't gotten our lives together completely from that. And now to go down these same roads, to see BP follow this same path, I mean, it just boggles the mind. You know, you're still not listening to the people, you know, and you're not listening. You know, our parish president, Billy Nungesser, and I'd love to make this comment if you don't mind, sir. The night this incident happened, the first thing he did, and we were on the phone 11, 12 o'clock at night, he called his entire fishing community and got advice, and he knew what he had to do by the next day. Problem is, nobody listened to him.
But do you know who to talk to?
Yeah, you know, and I mean, and it's the same thing. We just keep going down the circle. We've been begging for those islands to be pumped back for over 40 years. And so, you know, it's the same, you know, thing, you know, I mean, and that's the problem.
One more question, sort of one more. Top Kill apparently is working now, at least so far today. Who made that decision to use that procedure? Did BP make that decision? Willis, do you know?
I'll preface my comment by saying that I was not involved in that decision. I've been involved in the claims process. But what I've heard...
I think we need to have somebody from BP that made some other decisions besides claim here, Mr. Chairman, at some point, if that's appropriate. I was just curious, but nobody can apparently answer that. Since it probably works, maybe why wasn't it tried 3 weeks ago? Maybe we'll find somebody else who can answer that question for us, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Steve Cohen, Chairman of the Commercial Law Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask Mr. Willis. I was reading your statement. Where did you go to school?
I went to high school at McDonough 35, and I went to Northwestern State University in Natchitoches, Louisiana.
Okay. You're going to pay all these damages, and somewhere it said directly related to. What if there's a restaurant that doesn't have, like Galatoire's, let's just say, or Acme Oyster Bar? They don't have any oysters, or oysters, or whatever Harry Connick wants to call them this day. Who's going to pay the Acme Oyster Bar? Are you going to do that?
Congressman Cohen, what we're going to do is, and we've put a process in place so that any business that feels like it's been directly hurt or impacted by this oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico can go in and file a claim through our process, and it'll be reviewed.
It'll be reviewed. And that's been your stock answer, and I realize that's your limit of your authority. But the problem you've got is every restaurant in Louisiana, in the Gulf Coast, but particularly New Orleans, is going to be hurt. People go to New Orleans for a couple of reasons. One of them is to eat. And you know, ain't got any oysters, you ain't going to go down there to eat. And if you're a seafood restaurant, you're really going to be hurt. So, you know, Felix's, bad news. Acme, bad news. And while you can eat steak down there, you really go for the seafood. Rental car businesses, they're going to be hurt. Hotels going to be hurt. Casinos going to be hurt because people aren't going to be going down there. Are you going to, they all can file claims. Give me your thoughts of the probability of those folks being compensated by BP oil, because really you need to subsidize the state of Louisiana for a long time.
I start by saying that I love the Acme Oyster House. It's one of my favorite places to eat.
Hope I can meet you there sometime in the future, and maybe we got to be reload.
And what I would add to my comments is that this claims process is very specific. Individual claims would be very specific. Some of the easiest claims to resolve are those around individuals, fishermen, crabbers, oystermen. Business claims are coming in now, and we're looking at everyone individually. We're using the best resources available, and we will make fair decisions. Our goal through this whole process is to be reasonable, is to be efficient, and to be fair, and to do the right thing.
I got what you're saying. It's just going to be tough, because to do the right thing, you're really going to have to take over that state and part of Mississippi and part of Alabama, I guess, because the damages you've caused are going to affect those states for the rest of my life, probably. Long time, several decades. And that's just fact. You're going to have to advertise every Tulane basketball game, even if nobody goes. LSU football game. You need to be the sponsor for all of them. Baseball team, everything. What was the profits of BP oil last year?
The profits for BP last year, I don't know that number offhand.
Give me a ballpark figure.
I would guess it was on the order of $20 billion.
That's not enough. Y'all got to work harder. That's not going to take care of what you're going to owe. Y'all going to just go out of business?
We're going to do the right thing, and we're going to mitigate all of the damage that we've caused as a result of this spill that we're obligated to do under the law. But in addition, there's some other things we're going to do as well. For example, we offered up the $25 million block grants to the state to expedite the cleanup process. We recently offered $70 million to the states to help sort of publicize tourism.
How about all the losses they're going to have in sales tax revenue from folks not going down there? And how about when the marshes are destroyed, the next big 5 hurricane comes in and the city gets wiped out? You're going to compensate the city of New Orleans for its past and for another evacuation of the city?
We will cover the expenses, the legitimate expenses that have been substantiated and are related to this spill.
Mr. Willis, you're doing your job good, and you got a tough job, because legitimate, directly, and recording this bill, there's going to be a lot of people in this nation that are going to suffer, and the government's going to end up being the surety for all of your negligence, because we're going to have to pay for it and make up for Louisiana's losses and all those cities. It's going to fall on the backs of the United States taxpayer, and we're going to have to come to the rescue, because you're not going to do it, because you're going to say they're not direct, et cetera, et cetera. Not your fault. It's your fault to your company. You're doing your job. Mr. Lemmer, is it Lemmer or Lemmer?
It's Lemmer, Congressman.
Yes, sir. You know something about the safety valve program, I guess. Is that right? That's what y'all
Well, I'm a lawyer, not an engineer, so I know something about it generally, yes.
Well, when Judge Poe was throwing around, or not him, but Trent Frank's throwing around those words, it seemed like you understood them. Should BP or somebody had seen a worst possible case scenario that this would have occurred and been prepared to respond? Should they not have been prepared to respond in some manner?
Sir, that's a difficult question for me to answer, because we're an equipment and service supplier. BP is the operator. I mean,
right, but as a service supplier, wasn't there a possibility that what you supplied would have a problem, which it apparently did, and that they should have anticipated that and seen the worst possible case scenario and had top kill ready to go before this ever happened?
Well, should BP have foreseen something like this occurring? I mean, BP has testified that they viewed this as a fail-safe device, when in fact it's not. It's the last chance, but it's not a fail-safe. So should they have foreseen it? I don't know. That's going to be for the courts to decide in the future. Right. Should they have a top kill ready to go? That's a different question. That procedure, I understand, has been used on the surface, has never been used at these depths. I don't know that it's ever been called on to be used at these depths before. It was talked about early on after the blowout, but why other efforts got priority over the top kill, I can't tell you.
And I don't know who the right person would be to answer this question. Maybe nobody can. But it doesn't seem to me that it's right to allow us to let any company drill at depths where we don't have the ability to go in there and stop a leak. We don't have that ability, but, well, top kill wasn't done at that depth. The first thing we had, which was the dome, we didn't have the super dome ready. We couldn't do that either because we hadn't done it at that depth. We didn't know it was going to freeze when it got down there and the salt water and all this stuff, and it's going to have a problem. Well, if they don't know how to do it, we shouldn't let them drill. And it was the negligence of the Bush, Cheney, Halliburton regime that gave them that authority. And we're suffering from it today because they allowed this to occur, and it never should have been permitted. And for 8 years, after they had their secret meetings in 2000 and in 2001 that we still haven't seen the results of with the oil companies, and BP was there, and Conoco was there, and ExxonMobil was there, and Cheney was there, they came up with an energy program that has hurt this country to this day and continues to hurt the country, and the responsibility for this goes back to Bush, Cheney, and Halliburton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Magistrate Hank Johnson, Chair of Courts Committee from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Willis, I think you have the bearing and the manner of an attorney or a public relations professional, and I want to just I want to commend you for the way in which you have handled the task that you were called upon to do today, which is to represent British Petroleum. And let me ask you, I've heard you say earlier that you have a degree in geology?
In geology and geophysics, a master's degree.
Uh-huh. And have you been to law school, or?
I have not.
Uh-huh. And now, do you report to a lawyer?
I do not.
You do not? Now, well, who do you report to? What division, if you will, of BP?
In my day job outside of the response associated with the spill, I report to the Executive Vice President for North America Gas.
Okay.
I am the VP of Resources, which essentially means I'm the VP for Geology and Geophysics and Petrophysics for the Lower 48 onshore business.
And you have no responsibility for dealing with legal issues whatsoever?
I do not deal with legal issues.
And but you've been assigned to deal with claims issues.
I volunteered to be a part of this claims process for two reasons. One is because I lived through Katrina with my mother. I lived through the road home. As a matter of fact, the check for the road home came. By the time we got the check from the road home, my mother was dead.
Well, now you're kind of eating but kind of filibustering me right now, though. Let me proceed on. So you volunteered to serve your company in any way that they thought would be good, and so they assigned you to be the claims representative?
Actually, they didn't assign me to be claims representative. I saw that as an emerging need once the well continued to flow.
Got you. Now, having volunteered to handle the task of handling claims, are you working with an insurance company as you handle these claims?
We are actually working with a company called ESIS, which is a catastrophic, a company that deals in managing catastrophic claims for businesses. They are not an insurance company, although they are owned by an insurance company called ACE.
All right. But so essentially, Gulf Oil is, BP Petroleum is self-insured with respect to this kind of catastrophe.
That is my understanding.
All right. And the claims process is a process that traditionally you adjust the claims and you limit your liability. Is that your understanding?
My understanding of the process that we have in place is that we are going to make sure we put a process in place that's efficient, that's fair, that's reasonable,
Why-
and that
let me-
pays people for the losses they've incurred.
Let me ask you this question. We got all these lawyers here. We got professor of law. The hearing, we got, you know, we got lawyers all across the room. And the hearing is on legal liability issues surrounding the Gulf Coast oil disaster. Can you think of any person at BP who would perhaps be more appropriate to handle this task than what you volunteered to take on? When I say this task, I mean preparing to appear before this committee today. Is there someone who could have perhaps done it a little better than yourself?
I think in terms of coming to this committee to talk about how BP is responding to the needs of the folks in the community in regards to the damage that's being caused by this spill, I'm the best person to do that.
Okay, well, did you bring your claims package here? I assume that you have a package, claim forms, if you will, that people would have to fill out. Isn't that correct?
There are claims forms that people will have to fill out, yes.
Last week, I had the opportunity to ask questions as a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the Water Resources Subcommittee. Had the opportunity to question your president, and he promised to send the entire claims package to us, which we have not received yet. Did he entrust you with that claims package to bring here today, since you are the person in charge of claims for BP International, if you will?
When you say claims package, can you tell me what you mean?
All of the forms that one would have to sign in order for their claim to be considered.
I did not bring those forms with me today.
Why not?
I was not aware that I needed to bring those forms with me today.
Well, tell us, can you, since you're in charge of the claims process, can you list for me, as you sit here today, all of the forms that are in the claims package?
Yes, and it depends. There are...
Well, now, hold on now. It depends. Only thing I want is just the name of each form in the claims package.
Okay.
All claims packages combined.
Okay, so I'll start by saying that the claims form is available on our website at www.bp.com/claims.
Mm-hmm.
And on that website, we are going to have a claims manual that summarizes everything that's involved in the claims process. That manual is about 52 pages.
And I'm asking you for the forms that must be filled out.
Yes.
Whether or not they are over the internet or whether or not they are hard copies. I just want to get...
Okay.
Yeah, so you got a claim application form.
So there's a claim application form.
Okay.
And that form differs slightly if you are a fisherman.
What else do you have other than the claim application form, which may differ
That's
depending on
it.
whether or not it's an economic damage or an environmental damage or an injury claim, personal injury claim? So you got the claim application.
Yes.
What else do you have?
That is the form that has to be filled out.
Mm-hmm. How many pages is it? That's the only form?
That is the only form that needs to be filled out. In addition to that form, there's some documentation that's required.
Yeah, release of information or something like that?
What we ask for is some proof of income. It could be a tax return. It could be payroll stubs. It could be deposit receipts. It could be fish tickets or shrimp tickets showing that you've actually transported and delivered a load for sale.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, let me ask you this question. You said the other day, you said earlier in this hearing that you'd paid out about 37 million claims $37 million in claims on with 400 adjusters, 24 walk-in clinics, and those kinds of things, internet filing claims and everything. The $37 million, 25 of that went to Mississippi. Was that the 25 million?
No, that is something totally separate. The 37 million is associated with money that's directly been put into the hands of fishermen, shrimpers, oyster harvesters, and businessmen in the local communities from Louisiana to Florida.
So what about releases, a release of any and all liability in return for the payment that would be generated by the claim application?
There is no release required in our claims process.
Okay. And the conversations that were had at the disembarking location when the workers were brought back to land about 28 hours or so after the tragedy occurred, were those interviews tape recorded, either audio or video?
I do not know anything about what happened and what you've just described. I took over and started running the claims process associated with responding to the oil spill on the 29th of April.
All right. Thank you, sir. Ms. Clingman, basically what you're arguing is that you are indemnified, or in other words, Transocean is indemnified for any and all liability that it may have to others as a result of this catastrophe. You're indemnified by BP.
Yes, Congressman, our contractual arrangements are similar to the OPA statute and also to the organizational chart for a rig. So BP is the operator, is responsible for the well and any hydrocarbons for the well. That's the OPA law, and that is reflected in our contract as well. You're exactly correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and as you know, or as you may know, Transocean approved a $1 billion dividend to shareholders just back on May the 15th, May the 14th, actually. Some have argued that that dividend makes it more difficult for victims of the Deepwater Horizon to pursue liability claims against your company. Others have likened this to a fraudulent transfer in bankruptcy, when a debtor transfers money or property immediately before filing a bankruptcy petition. Is this within 45 days of the event? Actually, within about 2 or 3 weeks before the event, we have this transfer of wealth, if you will, from the corporation to the shareholders. And I don't know who those shareholders are, but I would assume them to be closely associated with the company in terms of management. Was that an appropriate time, in your opinion, for shareholders to take those profits?
I'm very glad, Congressman, you asked that question, because there has been confusion about the declared dividend. And if I could clarify some of the timing.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please?
Yes, sir. I'm glad you asked the question. There has been some confusion about the declared dividend, and I would like to address that. First and foremost, the dividend declared, none of which has been paid to date, in no way affects Transocean's responsibility or ability to meet its legal obligations to persons involved in this incident. So there is no, in terms of relation to bankruptcy or depleting assets, there is no concern whatsoever that Transocean will not be able to meet its liabilities. Addressing the dividend specifically, I agree with you that the timing does not look as good as it might given the incident. It was, however, put in place significantly before the Deep Horizon incident. This had been board approved back in February of 2010, after several years of Transocean being in a growth mode, not paying shareholder dividends. And so the board had decided, mainly based on competitive factors and other drilling companies paying dividends, that it was time to reward loyal shareholders with an approximately $4 per share dividend. That was put out in a recommendation and a proxy filed with the SEC and distributed to shareholders before the Deep Horizon incident. Now, you should also know there are safeguards in place to prevent the eventuality you described from being true. Under applicable law.
Well, I don't want you to go into that because I want to yield back the balance of my time, but I do want to say that I feel that you have been a very knowledgeable and you've been very knowledgeable and communicative with me. And the time that I was here in this hearing, you have also been very forthright. I would love for BP, I would love to be able to look at that position on the table. Because this doesn't, it's not personally directed at you, Mr. Willis, but I would love to be able to say the same thing about BP. I feel like we've gotten bamboozled by BP with you being here to answer the questions of members of Congress. And if I could, Mr. Chairman, I've been asked for short yield to Mr. Cohen, and I shall so yield.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I needed to follow up and ask a question of Mr. Ferguson here, since he's with Halliburton. What knowledge do you have, and did you attend any of those meetings with Vice President Cheney when they brought about the oil policy for the United States of America?
I have no knowledge of that whatsoever. I've never attended any meeting. My understanding is nobody from Halliburton attended any such meeting.
So you haven't seen any memos, any papers?
No, sir, I have not.
No. You know anything about those meetings at all?
Sir?
You don't know anything about those meetings at all?
Only what I've read in the newspapers.
Yeah. Is Mr. Cheney involved with Halliburton now?
Not in any way that I know of.
Okay. In Transocean and Halliburton and BP, do y'all have any members of one of the other companies on your boards? Does anybody here, do you know? Mr. Willis, do you know who's on the board of BP?
I do not have those names in my head, no.
Ms. Clingman?
I don't know of any members of these companies serving on our board. I will absolutely find out and get back to you.
It's public knowledge, I'm sure. Mr. Ferguson, you had?
Right. There's no current person at BP that's on our board. There's one board member that's retired some years ago from BP that's on our board right now.
He's retired. What's his name?
His name is Robert Malone.
And what was his position at BP?
Don't hold me to this. I think he had a similar position to what Lamar McKay does.
President
of BP Americas.
Okay, and he's is now on the board of Halliburton.
Right. Although, like I said, he's completely separated from BP.
Okay, Ms. Clingman, what were the profits last year of Transocean?
The Transocean entity that paid the dividend out of Switzerland. I'd have to get the number. I don't know. I don't have an exact
ballpark
figure.
No. And Mr. Ferguson, what's ballpark on Halliburton last year?
Again, we can get the number, but it's something under $1 billion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
And I'll yield back. Thank you.
Dr. Judy Chu of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, let me ask the panel, even though only a dozen of Transocean's employees are physically located in Zug, Switzerland, and more than 1,300 are based in Houston, Texas, Transocean moved its headquarters 2 years ago. To me, it seems the apparent underlying purpose is to avoid U.S. corporate income tax. We now know that the Transocean flagged the Deepwater Horizon in the Marshall Islands. Can anyone on the panel explain why a vessel that is flagged in a particular country, whether such companies seek to avoid safety regulations by flagging the vessel outside the United States?
Yes, Congresswoman, I'd be happy to address that. You're correct. The Deepwater Horizon is flagged in the Marshall Islands. Transocean is an international company. Of our approximately 139 drilling rigs, all but 15 are outside of the United States. And so very few of our vessels are flagged in the United States. Most importantly, that does not result in any break in operational requirements for operating in U.S. waters, and we remain under U.S. Coast Guard jurisdiction for our operations in United States waters, such as the Gulf Coast. Logistically, however, if a rig is flagged in the United States, what that requires under Coast Guard regulations is that a member of the U.S. Coast Guard conduct a physical inspection of that rig annually. When the rig itself is traveling around the world and is sometimes in the Middle East or the Far East, that becomes a logistical issue. Another requirement is that a U.S. flagged vessel be captained by a U.S. citizen. We do that for every rig in the Gulf, and all of the members on board the Deepwater Horizon were citizens of the United States. However, when those rigs are moved to less hospitable jurisdictions, we have great difficulty employing a U.S. citizen to command and chair those rigs. And so the flagging is predominantly a logistical issue, as the majority of our rigs are working outside the United States. There is also a financial tax benefit to doing that, but importantly, there is no regulatory or compliance benefit from flagging the vessel in a foreign country as opposed to in the United States.
Does anybody else have any comment on that? Okay. Well, then I'll turn to another topic. Actually, I am very anxious to ask questions pertaining to the Vietnamese fishermen in the area. I have been in touch with representatives from the area, and they are experiencing particular problems. So, Mr. Willis, I'd like to ask you questions pertaining to their plight. There are today tens of thousands of Vietnamese shrimpers that are making their livelihoods in the waters of the Gulf Coast, and in fact, they represent about 1/3 of the shrimping community in the Gulf Coast. Because of that strong diaspora in Louisiana, Mississippi, and other Gulf states, there is a problem with English proficiency. And in fact, in one community in Louisiana, English language proficiency is about 10%. They have expressed concerns over access to BP and government programs due to the language barrier. The translators provided by BP have been unable to communicate clearly the legalities for seeking damages for lost income, clean up employment opportunities, and unemployment assistance. And in fact, Vietnamese fishermen have been encouraged to sign contracts written in English by BP representatives that provided $5,000 in damages in exchange for waiving one right to sue. And a similar liability waiver was required to access employment for the Vessel of Opportunity program, which hires local boat operators to assist with response activities. So in other words, to get the job, they'd have to sign that liability. First of all, are you still requiring people to sign the liability?
We never required any sort of signing of a waiver of liability for the claims process, never. There was a waiver of liability, as I understand it, associated with the Vessels of Opportunity program that you've described. That was destroyed, and a very simple form was put in place. It was a mistake, and it was corrected quickly.
So you are not requiring?
Absolutely
I want
not.
to hear you
We
say
are.
that you're not requiring that waiver of liability.
We are not requiring a waiver of liability.
Okay, is there...
Dr. Chu, I'm sorry, to correct the record, I'm Jim Hood, AG from Mississippi. We have many Vietnamese fishermen on our coast who did sign some of those waivers. We got a commitment out of BP to give us a list of those names, and we send translators down to make sure they know that that waiver has been withdrawn. So we're going to make sure that it did occur. It did occur for when they hired them to pull booms and so forth. So I want to make sure that was correct.
Yeah, and so what I want to make sure you understood what I said. For the claims process, there was never at any time a waiver required. For the Vessels of Opportunity program that Attorney General Hood just referenced, in the beginning there was, and it was destroyed. It was taken out of the process.
Well, is there something on the forms that say that there is a $5,000 limit for just the claims themselves?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Is there any, in terms of the claims form, does it suggest that there is some kind of $5,000 initial limit?
No, it does not. What we've said about the claims process is that we're going to compensate people for their losses. But in order to expedite the process, we're making advance payments, interim payments, to get money into people's hands within 48 hours versus having to wait 45 days or 30 days to make it happen.
Okay,
It does not say anything about $5,000 on the form.
Okay. Are these claims documents, these claims forms, are they translated into Vietnamese?
They are translated into Vietnamese and Spanish, and they can be actually accessed on our website at www.bp.com/claims.
Well, I want to point out that there have been some problems with the translation, and a Vietnamese priest told me that, for instance, the translation for deckhands was translated into something like hands growing out of decks. And I want to really emphasize that you have to have a culturally sensitive and culturally appropriate translation for these forms and for the outreach kind of program that you can have for these fishermen. And what kind of assistance will there be for people who are going through the process besides the translations of the forms?
So I'll tell you a little bit, Congresswoman Chu, what we've been doing. And I'll talk specifically about what I've been involved in Louisiana and Mississippi. In Louisiana, in Venice, and in New Orleans, and in Mississippi, in Biloxi. We have about 122 local people that we hired in our Venice Community Outreach Center. Half of those people, actually 60% of them, are either Vietnamese, Taiwanese, or from Cambodia. We have people working there to help us in a variety of ways. One, to get connected with the Vietnamese and Asian communities in the Louisiana area, but we've also moved some of those people into the Claims Center to help us get those folks through that claims process as quickly and efficiently as we can. In New Orleans, just on Monday, Congressman Gao had an expo where we had 500 to 600 Vietnamese present. He asked us if we would offer vessel of opportunity training. He asked us if we would open up a claim center for the day on site. We did. Recognizing that the process we have in place is not perfect, but we're going to correct the problems we see with it, he recommended 8 or 9, as I recall, translators that we should hire in our New Orleans office. We're in the process of bringing those folks in so that we can better connect with the community in the most effective way possible. In Mississippi, we've had training specifically for the Vietnamese community around the Vessel of Opportunity program. We've had that training done in Vietnamese. So we continue to work it every day and to make it as good as it can possibly be.
And you are going to get back to the people who signed those waivers and make sure that you do adequate outreach to them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to.
Okay. There are so many assistance programs available, but what steps will you take to educate the Vietnamese community through the media? You know, they don't partake necessarily of the mainstream media. Are you accessing the ethnic media?
I do not know the answer to that question, but that is definitely something I will find out.
Well, they need to know of these assistance programs, and I do have a list of the Vietnamese
I'd be happy to
media outlets here, so I would like you to make sure that they are part of this assistance and outreach program.
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I yield back.
Attorney Ted Deutsch of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Jones, my sympathy to you and condolences to your family and the 10 other families who are suffering. And Mr. Stone, Mr. Brown, to you and the other 15 injured, I appreciate very much your being here today. The goal of this hearing, I think, for the families of those who lost their lives and those who were injured, Mr. Encalade, those whose businesses have been so impacted, is ultimately to figure out how we attain justice. And along those lines, Mr. Willis, you've said that BP has stated, you've stated throughout, that you're going to pay all legitimate claims, notwithstanding the cap in the Oil Pollution Act. And I know that you've paid thus far 13,500 claims. What's the total dollar amount?
It's around $37 million.
And the analysis that you use to determine whether those claims are legitimate and how they're paid, is there any consideration of the amount of the claim when those claims are filed?
No. It's based on the claim that was submitted.
And will it change when you hit the $75 million cap and beyond?
It will not.
And Mr. Willis, if BP has made the determination that if in fact it is responsible for these losses and will pay well in excess of the $75 million, is that simply a company determination? I guess the question more is for Mr. Ferguson, Ms. Clingman. Ms. Clingman, Transocean seems to be the counterpart to BP. BP, according to Mr. Willis, tells us that they're going to pay in excess of the $75 million cap. Transocean, on the other hand, has filed a claim trying to limit its liability to $27 million. Why, in my case, I represent Southeast Florida. If this oil comes into the loop current and hits the southeast coast, the damages will be well in excess of millions, well in excess of the billions. Why is it appropriate for the liability to be limited?
It goes back, Congressman, to the two separate types of claims and all their many, many lawsuits. They fall into two big categories. One are the OPA claims, such as you're describing, damages to beachfront, to fishermen, to commercial industries, tourism industries. Those fall under the Oil Prevention Act. Those are the claims for which BP has been designated and has accepted responsible party status. Those are the ones going through the claim process. The lawsuit that we filed does not relate in any way to those types of claims. The limitation of liability action applies only to claims asserted under maritime law.
Then, in which case, under the Oil Pollution Act, if there were claims, you'd be limited by the $75 million.
With respect to Transocean, Transocean has accepted responsible party status under OPA only with respect to oil or fuels or diesel that would emanate from the rig itself on the seafloor.
Well,
I have no evidence that that's happened.
Ms. Clingman, let's assume that it's happened. Let's assume that this entire mess was Transocean's fault, just for the sake of this discussion. In that case, would Transocean acknowledge that the $75 million cap under OPA is inadequate and that you would be responsible or should be responsible for more than that?
Nothing under OPA puts us in a responsible party position for the oil well leak, which is what's leaking. So that really is, I can't weigh BP's cap.
Let me try it this way. For Ms. Clingman and Mr. Ferguson, I guess the question is this. There's a $75 million cap under OPA. The fact is, the estimates are that this may cost $14 billion. It may cost considerably more. We may not know for some time. Why shouldn't that cap be raised to a level that will help to compensate those whose lives have been turned upside down by this environmental disaster?
In our position, we're just not involved with the cap, but as a general proposition on the hypothetical that you mentioned, I think we would support any reasonable change in the law. I can't commit without seeing what it's written and what it's about, but the cap itself, as I've heard discussed here today, may be too low.
Mr. Willis, I know you've agreed to this, but the way to confirm that BP has agreed to this is to acknowledge the importance of increasing that cap beyond the $75 million. A reasonable amount, I would suggest to the three of you, is the amount necessary to compensate those for their losses. BP would be willing to see an increase in that cap, presumably?
We've said, and I'll say again, that we believe that cap is not relevant, and that we accept that we will exceed this cap and we will pay all legitimate claims above it.
Right, and therefore, Mr. Willis, if we introduce legislation to increase that cap, to remove that cap altogether, to cover all legitimate claims, BP would then support that legislation?
We will follow the law.
I'd like to turn to the Death on the High Seas Act for a moment. Under that statute, there's a discrepancy that we've heard about earlier, that the surviving family members of a person who dies on a vessel on the high seas versus the damages available to those relatives to the family members of a relative who died in a plane crash on the high seas, there is a discrepancy. And I'd like to know if there is anyone that could speak to why we shouldn't take action, why this Congress shouldn't take action immediately to change that law so that the families of those who perished in this accident should receive the same treatment as the families of those who have lost relatives in an airplane crash in precisely the same location.
I'd be happy to address that, and my answer would be that you should. That the current state of the law provides an inconsistency which allows recovery, as you've stated, to the victims of commercial aviation disasters, but it doesn't allow recovery to the other victims of maritime disasters. Today, right now, and I don't want to use the Joneses as an example, I hope they'll forgive me, but if they were to pursue their legal redress and if they were to establish liability, nobody in the family would recover anything for the loss of care, comfort, and society that they have suffered.
Right. Mr. Galligan, if I may follow up on that, in his opening statement, we heard Mr. Jones say that he worries about his newborn grandson, Maxwell, I think, and whether Maxwell will be eligible for any damages under the Death on the High Seas Act because he was born after his father, Gordon, died in this explosion. Can you comment on that? Can you give him some comfort in knowing that that's not the case?
I'm not sure I can give him comfort. I can tell him that the state of the law is somewhat confusing. In DOSA cases and general maritime law cases, what the courts will frequently do in situations to define relationship, whether it's parent, spouse, child, is they'll look to applicable state law to determine the relationship. So in this case, they would probably look to Louisiana law to decide whether or not a viable fetus subsequently born after the death of a parent has a right to recover. So Mr. Jones would have to go and consult what the law of Louisiana was, which of course means that the recovery of different people under DOSA cases in different states may be different depending upon the relevant state law. Certainly something that could be done here would be to say that a child includes a viable but not yet born fetus.
So Mr. Galligan, then just to wrap up this important topic, in order for us to ensure that Mr. Jones and the families of those others who perished in this accident, in order to ensure that they receive the treatment under law that they deserve and the compensation that should be rightfully theirs, the approach should be, one, to address this discrepancy that exists between airplane crashes and these types of accidents.
Yes.
And number two, to specifically address the types of family members and the occasions when this will be applicable.
Yes, and I think there's something else that you would have to address, and that would be the effective date of any amending legislation. You would have to consider whether or not you would make that amending legislation applicable to events that occurred before the passage of the legislation. And in doing that, the questions that arise are two. One is policy, and the other is constitutionality. And on the policy standpoint, the questions are adequate compensation, which I've already discussed, modernizing the law, which I've already discussed, and making the law consistent with other aspects of maritime law and state law. And on constitutionality, unless a statute retroactively applied is going to inhibit some other constitutional right, the balance and test is there a reasonable, rational basis to do that? And the rationality would be supported by what? By the same things that would justify the policy change. Interestingly, you did exactly that when you amended DOSA in 2000 to make loss of society recoverable by the survivors of victims of commercial aviation disasters.
Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I'd just like to again thank Mr. Jones and give Mr. Jones my commitment that I will work with you, Mr. Chair, and this committee to do what we need to in an effort to amend DOSA so that you and the other families can receive the appropriate respect that you deserve under law. And I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Charles Gonzalez of Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, to Mr. Jones and his son, Chris, you're lawyers. Most of us up here are lawyers. Lots of lawyers are witnesses today, and we're taught that words are powerful. They can convey a message. They can express every human emotion until you experience what you've experienced. Then we know they're not. And so as inadequate as the words are that you may find from members, it is sincerely felt. I just wish there was a way that we could convey them adequately. And so let's talk about adequacy. And it is something that Mr. Jones brought in his statement was about responsibility, liability. What is the law supposed to accomplish? And coming full circle, because we started off with Mr. Conyers' opening statement. What's the jurisdiction of this committee? There are many things that we've asked today, and we may not be able to do much about them, but there is something we can do about the laws that govern the parties, the laws that allow remedies to the victims of what transpired in the Gulf, and looking at things prospectively. So my question is going to be just to a few of you. I'm going to assume certain things, though, and I'm going to ask that you assume them with me, that the purpose of the law would be twofold. I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. I'm going to follow up on something Mr. Deutsch touched on. But if the law is to accomplish anything, it would be two things. One, it instills responsibility because of liability. That's human nature. The law does not assume that people are just going to do the right thing. The law is not going to assume that a party is not going to be negligent. It assumes negligence. It assumes carelessness. It assumes acts that are intended, actually. That's what we have to prepare for. Now, there are consequences to those. They're called victims. And so what the law then proposes to do is to make the victim whole. That's justice. So it's really simple. I think we all started off in law school kind of understanding those concepts, and we lost our way somewhere along that whole process. But nevertheless, if you apply that test, and we look at what we have today in the way of laws governing incidents that have occurred in the Gulf, and I would say may occur again, hopefully not to this degree, but we know there'll be accidents, are the laws that are presently on the books adequate? Adequate to instill responsibility and adequate to make victims whole for their losses? Mr. Willis, I know you're not a lawyer, but I'm still going to ask you, do we need to amend the laws that govern instances of this nature?
Representative Gonzalez, and you're right, I'm not a lawyer, but what I'll say to you is that one of the things I've worked very hard to understand as I've been involved in this process is what the law is around the damage that's being caused by this spill. And what I can tell you is that whatever the law is, BP is going to follow it. I've said, and I'll keep saying, that we are going to go past this $75 million cap because it's just not going to be enough to repair the damage that's being done by this oil well that's been flowing in the Gulf of Mexico.
And I understand
we're going to follow the law.
It goes way beyond the $75 million. It goes into the types of remedies, the types of causes of action, the elements of damages. I mean, this goes way beyond certain numbers. And I don't mean to pass over Mr. Hood. What's your opinion? We need to amend the laws? You've asked us to, so I assume your answer is going to be yes.
Yes, sir, and I proposed to attach to our comments about 5 different ways that we thought that would benefit the states, just to protect the state's interest and the damages that we may be subject to incur. You know, what affects the states also, some of these amendments also affects these individual claimants from Mississippi. I mean, a company, by the time this thing is over, I suspect will have caused damage to hundreds of Mississippians. Yet they, under the Class Action Fairness Act or different federal procedure moves, they'll have them in your state and Mississippi claimants because a company has come to Mississippi and caused damage down there in a multi-district litigation or a class action court. And that court will decide categories of people, of their damages, and they don't get, some will get more than they should. Some will get less than they should. And I think everybody ought to be paid what they're owed, and that's it, no more. So I would ask the committee, in addition to considering the proposed amendments that I have proposed, expressly dealing with states, accepting states from CAFA, I would ask the committee to go back and look at that Class Action Fairness Act and some of the abuses that are occurring by federal judges just to get a case settled. And you got thousands of cases. It's human nature. You're going to just try to do everything you can to force a settlement, and then people are left out. And I think it's not fair. It's not a fair process. So, other than those written things I've mentioned, I think Professor was dead on some of the inequities among the different admiralty acts as well.
And then, Ms. Clingman, present law is adequate or inadequate?
Well, Congressman, I am an attorney, and I take the laws as Congress has enacted them and then make my legal recommendations based on the facts. And we're not there yet in this case because we don't have the facts, and I would urge Congress to have that same deliberateness in finding out first what has happened. It is inherently imperfect to compensate losses like this, the loss of human life, the loss of livelihood, the loss of recreational beach shore with money. However, I do believe that the U.S. justice system is the best in the world, and our U.S. justice system has dealt with legal complexity, torts, loss, damages for more than 100 years and has done it very well. So I would encourage this committee and other members of Congress to let the judicial system do its job, to let the U.S. Coast Guard do its investigative job, and then to take, as we will in looking at our liability, a deliberate look at the legal regime and see if any changes need to be made.
But the courts can only apply the laws that we enact. And if we restrict recoveries, we restrict causes of action, we restrict damages, we cap, we limit, do we need to be addressing that so that we can give the courts maybe a little bit more latitude to address what are legitimate complaints, legitimate damages and losses? See, I tend to believe we're going to do something. And what we have in place today, it's antiquated, obviously, but it's just not fair. I understand what you're saying. We can let this thing play out, but I'm not sure that is exactly going to happen because there's some really glaring shortcomings as we even start the process. I'll ask Mr. Ferguson, law is adequate or inadequate?
Well, I think we're certainly going to find out. And that lesson that's learned from that is going to drive the policy that determines how do we change these laws. The position we're in is that our policy is we comply with laws. And if the laws are changed, we're going to comply with the way they're changed. It's clear that there's issues that are immediately obvious from what's happening here. And it's up to Congress to address that policy and to change those laws as appropriate.
And I know, Mr. Foley, you've touched on it, and you said sometimes there's reasons that laws may look somewhat inadequate because they need to promote what might be commerce and such. And to some extent, I might even agree, and I'm not going to totally disagree with the ranking member, Mr. Smith, my neighbor in San Antonio, but I don't think this would be the death knell of drilling if we just have a little bit more justice in what is available to folks. I'll ask the professor, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume that you're saying, just as the Attorney General, is it, you guys need to change the laws and make them a lot more fair.
Yes, obviously there will be investigations. The facts still have to come out, but the laws in this area are imperfect. You said it, tort law ought to be about fairness. Aristotle called it corrective justice. It ought to compensate people to make them whole. If we don't compensate for loss of society in maritime wrongful death cases, we're not making them whole. Tort law ought to deter. It ought to encourage appropriate, efficient investments in safety. If we undercompensate, by definition, we underdeter. And the Limitation of Liability Act of 1851, which applies to the personal injury and wrongful death claims here, is a further potential underdeterrent because it's a further potential limitation of liability.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
I thank the witnesses for their endurance and their testimony. And we'll have 5 days in which questions may be submitted to you that we'd ask be returned, and 5 days for any additional materials that might be submitted. And I'd introduce into the record written materials from Michael Russell and Steve Gordon. We thank you very much, and we declare this hearing at an end.